Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 755. 755, April the 18th, 2019, Thursday. Thank you so much for tuning in. Well, Papadopoulos did an interview yesterday with Michael Tracey, who is by no means a conservative or a Trump supporter or anything like that. Quite the opposite. But Michael Tracey has been one of those reporters on the left who has honestly dealt with the Spygate fiasco. He is pretty much referred to it as a fiasco. He's never bought into the Trump-Russia collusion delusion. But he is on the left, much like Jimmy Dore and a couple of other lefties who have never really bought into the Trump-Russia collusion delusion. So it was a good person to have Papadopoulos give his interview with. Michael Tracey had pretty much information going in, but certainly Papadopoulos is dropping some bombshells, some mini bombshells all over the place, and he's saying things. I went over some things last week. There's some more things from this interview that I'm pretty sure he would not have been able to talk about prior to the end of the Mueller investigation. I think he pretty much had a gag order on him, or there were certain things he couldn't talk about until the Mueller investigation ended. So now he's obviously free to come out and talk about things, and these are things that, quite honestly, had we heard these things 3 months ago or what have you, these things would have been major headline news. Now, because there's so much going on, the Mueller Report's over, and people are talking, probably he's getting lost in the mix a little bit. But these are hugely important bombs that he drops in this interview. And there's about 6 or 7 things he said in this interview, which I highly recommend you listen to it. It's a radio interview, and it's about an hour and a half long, but it's well worth it. That's why I didn't respond to any of your comments from the last video last night, because I was preoccupied listening to, I should say, this Michael Tracey interview with Papadopoulos. So let's go through some of the things we learned from Papadopoulos in this interview. And if you haven't heard it, some of these things are going to blow your mind again. So they're having this conversation, and they're talking about things that are going to be learned when we get these declassified documents. These documents that Trump is wanting to declassify and release, but he had been blocked from that because he was told that you would be considered obstructing with the Mueller probe. So I guess because now that's over, Papadopoulos can drop these bombs. And he is suggesting here that he believes that those Bruce Orr 302s, getting them completely unredacted, getting all these 302s, because apparently there's more. And he is suggesting, Papadopoulos is suggesting, that Misfit, Joseph Misfit, is mentioned in the Bruce Orr 302s. Now that's kind of crazy. Why would Bruce Orr be, because remember, Bruce Orr was transmitting his information, transferring information over to the FBI via a handler, for the most part. He did have some direct meetings with DOJ officials, and once even with McCabe himself. But most of the time, he was had a sort of a handler. And Joe Pientka was the handler, and then there was another FBI guy that was a handler on a couple of these interviews with Bruce Orr. So how does Misfit come into the orbit of Bruce Orr? And we have to assume that that's what we're talking about here. I mean, why would his handler, his FBI handler, bring up Misfit? I don't think he would. Typically, an FBI agent doing an interview, they're asking questions, but they're mostly listening to, trying to get information. They're asking questions, getting information. They're generally not throwing things out there too much. And certainly in this case, Misfit, we know, is an agent working for Western intelligence. Why would his FBI handler bring that up? I don't see it coming from that side. But it's equally odd to imagine how Bruce Orr would be discussing Misfit. How does Bruce Orr connect with Misfit? So, and I'm not sure if this is 100% true or not. This is Papadopoulos speculating. I don't know if he knows this, if he's been told this, if he's, determined this based on other information he's received or from his testimony in Congress or whatever. I'm not sure what's making Papadopoulos make this assertion, but he's certainly making it, and he's saying that the fully unredacted, when they get the fully unredacted, all the Bruce Orr 302s, that there is going to be information in there that is about Misfit. And that's pretty interesting. Remember, the FBI did interview Misfit about the same time they interviewed Papadopoulos back in January 2017. They interviewed Misfit when he was here in the States, and as part of a some sort of a function that was associated with the State Department. So we'll just have to wait and see about that. But that's pretty interesting. I'd be, kind of curious and to know how Misfit and Bruce Orr cross paths, or how that works. Very interesting. Here's something else he said. Papadopoulos said that once this investigation was over and everything, and he's finally able to talk to friends and former co-workers at the Hudson Institute and various other places, Clovis and various other people, that once he was finally able, because he had been pretty much under a gag order and wasn't allowed to speak to certain people while this whole thing was going on with himself. But he says once that was over and he started talking to friends and former co-workers, he found out that the FBI had gone to quite a few of these people and interviewed them and had talked to them about Papadopoulos. And he said in the process of doing so, he said they were showing these people photographs of Papadopoulos. Photographs of him walking down the street in front of some building, or getting in or out of a car, or standing next to somebody, or meeting with somebody. So clearly they were taking photographs, or some type of surveillance where they had photographic evidence and pics of Papadopoulos, which they were showing to his friends. And I think that's pretty interesting. So it wasn't just, electronic surveillance. It wasn't that they were just listening to his phone calls, reading his texts and emails, and looking at bank records and things like that. They actually had people, following him with some sort of video camera, shooting video or taking pictures of him. That's how closely he was being watched. And the fact that they were showing these photos and stuff to his friends, and asking them about these photos and things and such, that tells you a lot about how hot they were on Papadopoulos, trying to and why would they be showing these pics to his friends and interviewing his friends about these things? There's a lot of very strange things that were going on here. And this, of course, will be all information that will come out. Certainly Barr will have this information. I assume that the congressional committees that are able to see classified information probably know about this and just have not been able to talk about it. But Papadopoulos, he's sure talking about it. He was talking in one part of this interview with Michael Tracy about his wife, and how she got, sort of caught up in this thing. And he was talking about how the fact that she had gone out and was defending him, and that freaked out Mueller, and so they sent her a subpoena, and then they tried to scare her and tried to shut her up. And so he went on, he was talking about on this topic, and then he kind of drops this little mini bombshell where he says that, when he met his wife, and they were talking, and he was telling her about this Misfit character, she's like, "Oh, I know Misfit. I've known him for years. I worked at the European Union in the Parliament there, and I worked for him, and I know Misfit very well. I've been to very many events where he's been there." And of course, she started telling him about that Papadopoulos. She's telling, "Hey, you shouldn't trust Misfit. He's a shady character, and he's connected to all these people, and he knows the Clintons very well." In fact, she told Papadopoulos that Misfit even campaigned for Hillary Clinton and has been to dinners with Hillary Clinton, knows the Clintons very well, especially Hillary Clinton. So she draws a much closer relationship, a personal relationship, between Misfit and Hillary Clinton. They actually do know each other, as in like they really know each other, not like they just bumped into one another at the UN or they happen to know of each other. No, they actually know each other, which begs the question, at some point, if you're investigating the Rotten Reverend Clinton and her role in this, you would certainly like to get all of her communications and find out if there might be any communication she had between herself and Misfit. It's very interesting why he would be campaigning for Hillary, and I'm not sure where that campaigning took place. I'm not sure if it took place in the States or exactly where it took place, but that is another interesting tidbit, and it just shows this closer relationship with Misfit and the Rotten Reverend Clinton, which is key because, of course, Misfit is a major key to the entire plot. He's the guy who supposedly told Papadopoulos, in fact, Papadopoulos says this, that Misfit is the guy who told him about the Russians having Hillary's emails, even though Misfit has denied this in the past. Of course, Papadopoulos, again, talking about his conversation with Halper, and possibly even Downer as well, but certainly with Halper, says that the 28 pages, that when that's finally declassified and released, he says that is going to show exculpatory evidence. And that exculpatory evidence, he says, is the fact that Halper was recording that conversation. And then Papadopoulos says, yeah, but he also was holding up his phone and doing this with his phone, obviously like filming me or taking video or pics or something. But Papadopoulos said no, but he also actually was wearing some sort of a recording device. So he had both the audio recording of their conversation, but he also was like trying to get pics or take some video. And he said that may have been, because they wanted to have the FBI maybe wanted to have an actual picture or a video of Papadopoulos in conversation with an individual who they would probably claim as a Russian asset or something, when in fact it was actually Halper. But Papadopoulos says that the reason that this is probably redacted and the reason that we're not able to see it right now, and it's part of the 28 pages, is because he said it would be exculpatory evidence. Because he said in that conversation with Halper, Halper was pressing him over and over again, along with his assistant, the honeypot, trying to get Papadopoulos to talk about what he knew about the Russians and them having Hillary's emails and all these things. And of course, Papadopoulos, he said as soon as he sat down in that little meeting, he got bad vibes, and Halper went right into giving him strange looks and just acting really weird, at which point Papadopoulos got spooked and he just clammed up. He didn't want to talk about anything having to do with Russia or what have you. So he says that the interview or the conversation with Halper, which he says was recorded, that Halper was recording it, he says would be exculpatory evidence, because in the entire meeting, the whole time, Halper's pushing and pushing, but Papadopoulos is clammed up. He's saying, I don't know what you're talking about. Russians, I don't know any Russians. I don't speak Russian, never been to Russia, don't know any Russian diplomats. I don't know anything about what you're talking about, emails, whatever. I don't know what you're talking about. And so this, according to Papadopoulos, is exculpatory information, which is, he believes, in the 28 pages, which at some point will be declassified. And he said that's one of the major problems that they have. And he said, of course, Meadows and Nunez and all these guys know about what's in those 28 pages. And that's kind of where he's getting this information, I guess. So that's another interesting tidbit. He also talked about the fact that he himself, Papadopoulos, was the one who outed Stefan Halper. He's the one who outed Stefan Halper. Everybody was wanting to know who gave up Halper's name. And, of course, it was Papadopoulos himself. And he says the way that happened, he says, is that Chuck Ross called him on the phone and said, hey, man, I've been working on this story, and there's just a lot of things here that don't add up, and, I'd love to have a conversation with you if that'd be possible. And Papadopoulos said, yeah, well, I'm kind of in lockdown here in Chicago. I can't really go anywhere. I'm, kind of stuck here, and this whole thing's going on, but, I wouldn't mind, having a conversation with you. So, yeah, if you want to come to Chicago. So, apparently, at this point, Chuck Ross, he's in Missouri, St. Louis. So, Chuck Ross drives from St. Louis, or flies, one of the two, I guess. He goes to Chicago, and he meets with Papadopoulos. And in that meeting, which he said was at a restaurant, they went to some restaurant, and they were having lunch or whatever, and Chuck Ross is asking about all the things that are going on, and Papadopoulos is telling Chuck Ross about all the strange characters that showed up in his life in London, and all these people who he believes are somehow connected to Western intelligence and what have you. And at which point he tells Chuck Ross, well, this guy, Stephen Halper guy, Stefan Halper, he he bumps into me, tells me to come to London. Then he tells me to write an energy paper, and then he turns around and complains or criticizes my energy policy after having me write a paper on it. Then he's introducing me to all these strange people and the whole 9 yards. And so that's where he said that Chuck Ross got the name Stefan Halper, directly from Papadopoulos. So now we know how Halper was outed and by who. Papadopoulos. Another thing I thought was pretty interesting is that Papadopoulos said that 3 months before he was arrested, he was contacted by Brian Ross of ABC News and his producer, and they wanted to have a little conversation. And he said in the context of that conversation, the course of that conversation, he said that that Brian Ross of ABC News told him that there was a FISA on him. He said, "Hey, do you know that there's a FISA on you right now? That you're under FISA surveillance?" And Papadopoulos had no clue. He's like, "Huh? A FISA on me? Why would I have a FISA on me?" And Brian Ross said, "Well, that's something you might want to look into. I'm just telling you, there is a FISA warrant on you right now. You are under surveillance. You may want to look into that." So, anyway, those are some of the things that Papadopoulos revealed in his interview with Michael Tracy. So you may want to give that a listen. It's pretty interesting. A lot of it's things you've heard before, but there's some new information. And one thing about Papadopoulos, I've listened to a lot of his interviews in the past 2 weeks. He's been doing a lot. I've listened to every one I can find, watched every interview I can find. He's very consistent in his story. His story doesn't waver very much. So, he's pretty consistent, and more as I can see from Papadopoulos, the more and more I think he's probably has been telling the truth. As truthful as he can be, I assume. So, anyway, yeah, give it a listen. Those are some, again, a lot of this stuff is things we speculated on and have believed for a long time, but, we're finally able now to get actual firsthand testimony from people who can say, yeah, this actually did happen. So, yep, there you go. Alrighty, let's move on to some other news of the day. We have Giuliani, who's saying that he will have a rebuttal report to the Mueller report, and it will be released within hours of the Mueller report release. Yeah, so we've all known about this, and I understand it's a fairly scathing report because it apparently goes into a lot of the odious tactics used by the Mueller team to pressure people into composing tunes and various other things. So it's really pretty much of a serious critique of the Mueller investigation itself. Not so much, it certainly makes the case in Trump's defense, obviously, but a lot of it, Giuliani has said on Fox News. He said, hey, we're thinking about releasing this, and if we do, believe me, the Mueller team is not going to like it, because we basically tell you in there exactly how the Mueller team conducted themselves through the course of their investigation. Of course, we know from publicly what we saw, how they SWAT raided Stone, how they treated Manafort, put him in solitary confinement, 23 hours a day. So we can see what the Mueller team did. We have a lot of that, but Giuliani says there's much more, and when people actually read about how the Mueller team conducted this investigation and the way they treated people and how they went after people and tried to force people to compose and sing and all these things, he said it's going to open a lot of eyes, and it's going to be very critical and shine a very bad light on the Mueller investigation itself. So yes, I'll be looking forward to seeing that. That's for sure. Now, Nunez got more specific in an interview on Fox News yesterday about the information he forwarded over to Attorney General Barr. And there's three things that he's, in addition to the 5 people he made criminal referrals on and the 3 issues he made criminal referral on, he also brought up what he believes are 3 frame-ups or setups or traps that were set. And he focuses on those 3, and he wants Barr to investigate these 3 because they look to Nunez, just like they look to me and many of you, like, traps that were being set or frame-ups or setups. And Nunez said he's specifically asking Barr to look into the Michael Flynn setup, which we've covered here very, very much with this so-called Russian woman, I can pronounce her name, Svetlana Kahova, I think her name is. Svetlana Hakova, I think her name is. She's the woman over in London, at the London Center, who was seated next to Michael Flynn. Stefan Halper made that arrangement. Christopher Steele sitting right behind them, eavesdropping. This event here is what was first used back in 2014. Stefan Halper put this all together, and he leaked that information or passed that information along to his various intelligence apparatchiks, and that's when they started putting the focus on Flynn. So Nunez wants Barr to look into that and to see if he feels the same, that it certainly looked like a setup. He also wants Barr to look into the misfit question, whether he is actually a Russian agent or whether he's a Western intelligence asset. So Nunez wants Barr to look into misfit, which he also believes was a setup. And I agree again. And of course the Tower meeting, the Trump Tower meeting. The Russians involved, as Nunez says, were all basically connected to Confusion GPS or Hillary Clinton. And so he wants Barr to also look into that. He believes that too was a trap and a setup, and of course I agree as well. In fact, I did several videos just focusing on the Trump Tower meeting, went through every single character there, who they're connected to, and yes, it's obvious that they were all connected to either Hillary Clinton or Confusion GPS. We have this numbnuts Pete Buttigieg, who's this, of course, Democrat who's now risen to number 3 in the polls. Of course, as I said yesterday, it's just a matter of time before the Rotten Reverend and her folks take this guy out. They're probably digging up a dossier on him right now, and they'll put that together, and this guy will be toast in the probably, I think I said 1 to 2 weeks. Look for Buttigieg, look for the negative Niagara to come flowing over him. But in the meantime, this guy, he's obviously wanting to get in the running for Dumbass of the Week, because he made a comment yesterday. He said, I could take 30,000 or more immigrants into South Bend. My community in Indiana isn't full. I wonder how those people in South Bend, Indiana feel about taking 30,000 or more. Now he says immigrants. What he doesn't say is that they're illegal immigrants. He also doesn't know how many of these people are MS-13, or how many of these people are criminals, or how many of these people are just coming to, suck off the system or whatever. He doesn't really say any of that. He just says that, hey, I could take 30,000 or more immigrants into South Bend. My community in Indiana isn't full. This is nuts. What, you want your community full of illegals? Who would want that? This guy's a bonehead. William Barr is going to have a press conference at 9:30 a.m. This morning, Thursday morning, which probably is going to coincide with the release of the Mueller Report. So he apparently is going to have a press conference, and I assume he is going to take questions at that press conference. And so we will see how that all goes. That'll be probably pretty interesting to watch. Let's see. Of course, I guess most of you have heard about the discovery of this secret memo that was signed between these demo commies, Elijah Cummings, Mad Max, who was, of course, the dumbass of the week yesterday, and Adam the Bug-Eyed Fool Schiff. Apparently, they signed off on a secret memo, which was like this memo, which is just sort of this pact that they put together between themselves to target. It was like a pact that they all agreed that they were going to target Trump with investigations. Now, why would you do something so stupid and go on and put something in writing that you're actually just going to investigate the president just for the hell of it? Put it down in writing. I mean, well, we all assume they're going to do this anyway, but why would you go put this in writing and sign a pact? And then somehow it's found its way, it's surfaced, and now everybody in Congress knows about it. And there should definitely be something done here. I mean, you can't be having this. And we'll just have to see where this all leads. But this certainly isn't good, especially for Adam the Bug-Eyed Fool Schiff. There's already a movement underway to try to force him out. So we will have to see exactly if there's anything that comes of this. But I would think that certainly something that will come of this is all this stuff going on, all these investigations that they want to launch. getting Trump's tax returns, checking into his banking, and all these things. Based on this new evidence right here, this information, I would think that this would be a perfect case for Trump's lawyers and the DOJ, quite honestly, to deny cooperating at all with any of these committees headed by these three people. Because this shows that it's purely a political witch hunt. It's exactly what that shows. So it's these are not smart people, okay? These are not very smart people, and we know that. Mark Meadows is on Fox News. Now, he and Jordan have met with Huckleberry Horowitz, the Inspector General. They have met with Huckleberry Horowitz. And they won't really say specifically, Horowitz said this, Horowitz is going to do this, or anything like that. But Meadows is strongly suggesting that there will be criminal referrals coming out of the report by Inspector General Huckleberry Horowitz, which we expect to be sometime in May or June. And of course, there's two issues he's looking at, but I think Meadows is referring to the first issue that we're going to be hearing about, which Barr mentioned, is his investigation, which has been going on now for over a year, into the FISA abuse. So the first report we're going to get from Horowitz here is going to be on the FISA abuse, and Meadows is strongly suggesting that it will result in criminal referrals. Now, Andy McCabe got a criminal referral from Horowitz, but up to this time, no one in the DOJ has investigated that. As far as we know, there's been nothing that's happened to McCabe. He's out selling a book and lying. Let's hope that changes once Barr gets this Horowitz report, and once he finishes his investigation. Let's hope something changes. Nunez is also saying that he wants to have a private meeting with Uncle Bob, the executioner. Nunez wants to meet with Mueller. I'd love to be a fly on the wall for that meeting. That would be fantastic. Judicial Watch is suing for all communications between Michael Sussman and former General Counsel of the FBI, James Baker. Yeah, Michael Sussman was the Right Reverend Clinton's lawyer who worked for Perkins Coie. That was her lawyer. He's the one who hand-delivered on 2 occasions documents and thumb drives to the FBI. He's also the one who brought in CrowdStrike. He's also the one that handled a lot of the PR around the time that the alleged hack of the DNC and was putting out the Russian narrative and putting the spin on that. Sussman is also a former DOJ officer, some sort of a lawyer in the DOJ. So he's got a lot of connections to the players, and my guess is that's why the Right Reverend Clinton selected Sussman to be her attorney in this matter, is because he could pipeline things directly to the DOJ so that, again, she would have some cover. But his cover is going to be blown, her cover is going to be blown, and Sussman is going to be a person who there's going to be a lot of people looking at, I think, as we get farther down the road. This guy was more of a player in all of this than what a lot of people, some people want to think about right now, but his name just keeps popping up, and he was an operative, basically. He was representing her as a lawyer, but this dude was an operative, plain and simple. The skateboarder, Bobby O, was asked a question at a speech he was given by some college students, asking why some girl in college contributed more to charity than he did, despite the fact that he makes like $12 million a year or something. He's a multi-millionaire. And his response, basically, he kind of tripped over his words, but essentially the nuts and bolts of his response is that his answer was pretty much, well, you know, my gift to you is me. You've got me. Why should I have to donate to charity? I'm giving myself. This guy is a total loser. And you notice the skateboarder has been, Pete Buttigieg, once he threw his hat in the ring, it's like he kind of displaced O'Rourke. He dropped. And now O'Rourke is sitting back like around 4 or 5%. He's like at the bottom tier. So doesn't look like it's going to happen for the skateboarder. No one takes him very seriously, and I don't blame them. Now I want to spend the last couple minutes again just focusing again like I did last night. I ask a question. I like when I do that, and I like reading the responses to those questions sometimes I have. So here's another question for us all. And it's not so much that I want you guys, you have to comment on this. You can if you like, but it's more just something I want to put in your head to think about, just like I did last night to think about that. But tonight, think about this. So the Mueller report is coming out, and I guess I'm kind of curious about how the Mueller report is going to read. Is the Mueller report going to essentially endorse and try to sustain the credibility of the dossier, the FISA warrants, the human spies, the agent provocateurs, informants, whatever you want to call them, the contacts with Papadopoulos, Misfid? Is Mueller's report still going to refer to Misfid as a Russian spy or a Russian asset that Papadopoulos was meeting with? Is the Mueller report basically going to read like the dossier? Is it going to take all the things that we've been told all at this point, which have all been pretty much debunked? Is Uncle Bob's report going to use all those things as if they were true? Or is Uncle Bob's report going to debunk the Tower meeting, debunk the dossier, debunk this idea that Misfid was a Russian agent, debunk the fact that Halper was just a spy, as in like spying on the Russians? Because this is what they're saying. The official story is, oh, well, Halper and Downer or these guys, they weren't spying on Papadopoulos in the Trump campaign. They were spying on the Russians. Okay, we know this is bullshit, right? So we know all this stuff. We know the Trump Tower meeting was a setup. We know the FISA warrant was granted based on the dossier, which we know was bullshit. We know that Misfit is not a Russian agent. He's in fact a Western intelligence asset. We know that Papadopoulos they attempted to set him up and frame him, just as they did Carter Page and Michael Flynn. We know all these things. William Barr knows all these things. So is Uncle Bob's report going to treat all these things as they've been treated up to this point? Or is Uncle Bob going to debunk a lot of these things? Because if Uncle Bob relies on in his report on the Trump Tower meeting is still being suspicious, or on the dossier is still being this, intelligence that justified the investigation, which, keep in mind, his investigation was Operation Crossfire. Mueller's investigation was just an extension of that. Because if he doesn't debunk these things, then what happens? Barr finishes his investigation and then looks back on the Mueller probe and goes, wait a minute, I just finished my investigation and all this stuff that was in the Mueller report was all garbage. And I figured it out pretty quickly. How come Uncle Bob didn't figure it out? Or did he? Did he know it was all bullshit and he went ahead and put out a bullshit report? That wouldn't look good for Uncle Bob, would it? And what if Mueller debunks all this stuff? Well, if he debunks all this stuff, he debunks the FISA warrant, Misfit being a Russian agent, debunks the Tower meeting, debunks the dossier, then why the hell did he do a over 2 year long investigation? That he wanted to continue if Barr wouldn't have shut it down. You see, Uncle Bob has a lot of problems here. Has a lot of problems. And I would not doubt that at the end of all this, when Barr finishes his investigation and gets the Horowitz stuff and the Congress stuff and all that, and he finishes this and finds out it was all a hoax and a frame-up and a coup, that Uncle Bob and his team could be facing serious scrutiny just like everyone else. Maybe they'll SWAT raid Uncle Bob and Weissman at 5 o'clock in the morning in a pre-dawn raid. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow with more TowerGate. You guys have a good night. Thanks. See you.